On Christmas Eve, a family home went up in flames. 5 children were believed to have perished in the fire, but their bodies were never found. And for decades after, sightings, threats, and secrets haunted the family left behind. This is the chilling story of the Sodder children, a mystery that still burns with unanswered questions. Welcome to Dark Whispers, where fear finds its voice. If you love to listen to paranormal investigations, creepypastas, and unsolved mysteries, do surely subscribe and hit the bell icon for more notifications. And if you love to listen to any particular story, do hit us back in the comments. And without any further ado, let's get back to our story. It was Christmas Eve 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a small quiet town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. Dusty roads, wooden fences, the kind of place where everyone knew your name. And for the Sodder family, it was a night of peace and celebration. Their modest 2-story home sat on the edge of Route 16. The windows were lit with a warm ember glow. Inside, the scent of pine needles, baked cookies, and coal from the fireplace mixed in the air. The Sodders were a large family, 10 children, raised by George and Jennie, hard-working Italian immigrants who had built their life from the ground up. That evening, the younger children, Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jennie, and Betty, were giddy with excitement. They had spent the evening unwrapping small presents, singing carols, and making plans to open more gifts in the morning. Their older siblings, John and George Jr., helped clean up after dinner, while Marion, one of the eldest daughters, returned from work with a surprise. New toys from a local dime store, bought with her own paycheck. Laughter echoed through the house. It was the kind of scene that felt timeless, a perfect fleeting moment of happiness. Around 10 p.m., Jennie reminded the younger kids it was time for bed. Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jennie, and Betty pleaded to stay up a little longer to play with their new toys. Jennie agreed, but on one condition. They had to turn off the lights and lock the doors before going to sleep. George, tired from the day's work, had already gone to bed with their youngest, Sylvia, just 2 years old. Jennie soon followed, the house dimming into the quiet shadows. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the lawn in white. A calm, sacred stillness hung in the air. But just 1 a.m., that silence was shattered. It was just after 1 a.m., Christmas Eve 1945. The world outside was silent, blanketed in snow. Inside the Sodder home, the lights had been dimmed, gifts had been exchanged, and the younger children were tucked into bed. Jennie Sodder was asleep when she heard a strange sound. Something hit the roof. A loud, sudden thud, followed by a soft, rolling voice. Moments after, smoke crept into her bedroom. She ran out, frantic, yelling for her children. Flames were already licking the stairwell, cutting off the upstairs bedroom. George Sodder leapt from his bed and smashed windows to escape. He called out for his children. Only 4 came running. 5 were still inside. In the chaos, George tried everything. He sprinted outside to grab the ladder, which was always propped up against the house, but this time, it was gone. Later, it was found thrown down an embankment, far from reach. He ran to his coal trucks, thinking he could use them to climb to the 2nd floor, but the engines wouldn't start. Both trucks, working perfectly that same day, were dead. Jennie ran to the neighbor's house to call the fire department, but her call wouldn't go through. Another neighbor finally got through from a tavern downtown, but it was too late. The Sodders stood outside in the freezing cold barefoot in their nightclothes, watching their home burned to the ground. And the fire department? It was a volunteer unit. By that time, all that remained was smoldering ash and silence. But even then, something wasn't right. No bones, no skulls, no remains of the 5 children who had supposedly died in the blaze. And in the scorched rubble, investigators would uncover more questions than answers. The fire raged for about 45 minutes, reducing the Sodder home to a pile of glowing embers. But when the volunteer fire crew finally arrived, 7 hours later, they weren't met with a scene of tragedy. They were met with something impossible. There were no bodies, no charred bones, no teeth, no skulls, nothing that could prove anyone had died in that fire. Jennie Sodder was stunned. She had read articles on house fires, knew about cremation. Even in the hottest of blazes, bones would survive, especially from children, since their bones are denser than expected. Yet, the fire had supposedly burned so hot that 5 entire skeletons were reduced to nothing. The basement was searched carefully. Ash was sifted. Debris was moved. Still, no trace of Maurice, Martha, Louise, Jennie, or Betty. And then came the inconsistencies. The family's kitchen appliances were found. Their metal bed frames recognizable, warped but still intact. Even parts of their tin roof were still present. If the fire had burned hot enough to completely destroy 5 bodies, how did it leave the furniture behind? A local crematorium worker would later testify. To reduce a body to ash, it must burn at 1400 to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 2 hours in a controlled environment. The Sodder fire? Well, it just barely lasted 45 minutes. And there was more. The family phone line was assumed to have burned in the blaze, but a telephone repairman revealed something chilling. The line had been cut, not burned, severed intentionally before the fire began. And the missing ladder? It was found over 75 feet away, at the bottom of a small ravine behind the house. Add to that the trucks that wouldn't start. 2 perfectly working vehicles, both suddenly dead when George needed them the most. Some believed they were tampered with in advance. All of these strange elements pointed to a terrifying possibility. The fire may have been staged, not to kill, but to cover up a kidnapping. In the days after the fire, the official story was simple. The children had perished in the flames, the remains had been destroyed, case closed. But for George and Jennie, nothing made sense. They knew their children had not died in that fire. Something else had happened. And then, the sightings began. A woman working at a truck shop diner 50 miles away claimed she saw the children the very next morning. She said they arrived with 2 unfamiliar adults, both of whom spoke Italian. The children were quiet, subdued. She remembered one girl had long, dark hair, just like Jennie, the 80-year-old. When the children tried to speak, the adults grew intense and quickly silenced them. The entire group left abruptly. In Charleston, West Virginia, a hotel clerk reported something eerier. She claimed that several weeks after the fire, she saw 4 of the Sodder children in company of 2 women and 2 men. She distinctly remembered their appearance because the group checked in late at night, using fake names, and kept the children away from the windows. The adults were aggressive, refusing to let the children speak to anyone. She only came forward years later, after recognizing the children from a photo in a newspaper. In 1949, 4 years after the fire, George convinced authorities to excavate the site. A pathologist found a small piece of human vertebrae. But here's the twist. The bone belonged to a person over 17 years old. All the missing Sodder children were under 14, and the bone showed no signs of fire damage. So where did it come from? Why was it buried in the ash? No one could say. But that was only the beginning. In 1967, over 2 decades after the fire, Jennie received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a man in his late 20s. On the back was scrawled a haunting message. Louise Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Little boys, A901 32 or 35. The man in the photo looked eerily like Louise, the missing 9-year-old, aged forward. The Sodders were stunned. They hired private investigators to travel to Kentucky and search for the sender. He vanished, never to be heard from again. By the early 1950s, the fire was long extinguished. The ashes were cold, the authorities had closed the case. But for George and Jennie Sodder, there was no closure. Only a hollow space where 5 children once lived, and a mountain of unanswered questions. They had written letters to the FBI, to senators, to the White House itself. They had hired private detectives, followed up on leads across the country, and even explored the possibility of human trafficking rings. But the trail always seemed to vanish into silence. So in 1952, George Sodder did something radical. He took a hammer, some nails, a few planks of wood, and erected a massive billboard right on the edge of their property along Route 16. On the board were portraits of the 5 missing children, aged best as they could imagine. Alongside them, a timeline of events, suspicious details from the fire, and a gut-wrenching plea. What was the fate of our children? Kidnapped? Murdered? Burned? We need your help. The words weren't just a message to the passerby. They were a challenge, a bold refusal to accept the official version of the events. The billboard became a local landmark, known by many as the Wall of the Lost. Some people would stare, some people would cry, others would leave anonymous tips. Some even claimed to know more than they dared to say. And as the years passed, the photos of the children began to fade, weathered by rain, snow, and the slow decay of time. But Jennie and George refused to take it down. For years, they kept the billboard up. Every few years, they would repaint it, repair it, add new information, or a newly discovered clue. George would stand by the roadside for hours, hoping a traveler might recognize a face, that someone, somewhere, knew the truth. In interviews, George's voice often trembled, not with weakness, but with fury. They didn't die in that fire, he'd say. I'll go to my grave knowing that. And he did. George passed away in 1969. Jennie continued the journey, wearing only black for the rest of her life, a silent mourning that never lifted. When she died in 1989, the billboard was finally taken down. But in the hearts of many, it still stands, a chilling monument to a mystery that refuses to be forgotten. Even now, decades later, people still ask, what really happened to the Sodder children? Were they taken, hidden, raised by strangers under new names? Or did they vanish into a darkness no one dared to name? If stories like these send chills down your spine, subscribe to Dark Whispers, because the past is never truly gone, and some mysteries refused to die.